From frog legs that are invented by monks in the 12th century to kebabs stolen from the Turks, France has some of the best, if not a little weird, food in the world. When you visit Paris, don't be a typical American and go to a McDonald's. France arguably has the best food in the world, so how about you actually try and eat it when you visit? These 16 foods include a variety of things, from simple street food to fancy dining experiences. We base the list on some of the most common foods, as well as the less popular, but still delicious ones. Well, if not delicious, at least very intriguing. Frog legs. Yes, the French eat frogs. French people consume around 80 million of them every year, so that's roughly 160 million frog legs, if you assume that none of these frogs are disabled and are missing a limb. Maybe some of them only have one leg, but hey, who knows? Nature's cruel. France being populated by 67 million people, 80 million frog legs is not a lot, but it's still very much worth mentioning. Although not extremely common, frog legs are among the adventurous delicacies that Paris is known for. The best part about frog consumption is the history. One story claims the French started eating frog legs in the 12th century when monks who were on a mandatory no-meat diet figured out a way to classify frogs as fish. How can you not respect such a genius loophole? Croissant. A croissant doesn't seem hard to make, and yet eat a croissant in America and it's likely going to be awful compared to what you would find in Paris. In the French capital, you can go literally to any bakery and it will be delicious. And it's not all that expensive, plus it's usually around €1 or less, which is a little bit more than $1 or a little bit less or maybe 30 times more. Anyway, it just depends on the future when you're watching this video. Maybe you're watching this in a world where goats become a currency. Who knows? Cheese. The cheeses from Paris are known for their softness and their ancestral making. They're usually made from cow milk, and the most popular famous ones are the Brie type, which have their soft and tasty texture. Walking around the Parisian markets, you'll also find Colmenaire cheese, which is thicker and nuttier than Brie, but otherwise nearly identical. The great thing about cheese is that you can get fat while sounding sophisticated. Oysters. Now, this is a bit of a controversial one, as many of you might find it gross, but just hear us out because it's definitely not the weirdest one on the list. Oysters are definitely a thing in France, but about half of all consumption takes place during the holidays. They're obviously not from Paris. Oysters don't live there because the rent's too high, but the City of Love is a great place to find many kinds of oysters from different regions of France, such as the Antiquinine or Languedoc. There's other regions, but we just picked these two so I would have trouble pronouncing them. Baguette. Baguette is basically just delicious bread in the shape of a big, beautiful stick. You can actually hurt someone pretty bad with it when it's stale. The French don't have guns, but at least they do have baguettes. For some reason, baguettes taste amazing no matter what. You may plan to eat it with cheese or with ham or Nutella, but you'll probably start eating it on your own anyway. Opa. Allegedly, this pastry was invented in 1955 by Cyriac Galvian. If his name doesn't ring a bell, well, of course it doesn't. Why would anybody know the names of pastry inventors? His wife came up with the name Opa in an homage to the opera dancers who would come to their shop. Honestly, I'd love to have a pastry named after me. We could just simply call it Clearly Depressed YouTuber or something along those lines. It should be said that the invention of this pastry was later claimed by some guy named Gaston, but it turns out he was probably lying. Yes, there are pastry wars in the world of French desserts. Croque Monsieur. Sure, you may think, come on, it's just bread with cheese and ham. And yeah, you may have a croque monsieur somewhere else before, but somehow if you eat it in Paris, it's just way better than the sum of its parts. You will be absolutely thrilled to hear that eating a delicious croque monsieur by the Canal des Douacs, that you'll even eat the salad that comes with it. Yeah, somehow it always comes with salad, so you can just feel a tiny bit healthier after ordering a mixture of bread and ham with melted cheese. You can also find variants of it, such as the croque madame, which is basically the same but with a fried or poached egg on top. Steak fries. Steak meaning steak and fries meaning French fries, which allegedly are actually a Belgian thing, but we don't have time to get into that right now. This simple dish dates back to the 19th century and is now one of the most common foods that you will find in Parisian bistros. The meat that is served is usually ribeye steak, and it often comes with hollandaise or béarnaise sauce. It's not very complicated, food, but it's steak and French fries. You can't complain about that. Macaroon. A macaroon is kind of like a cookie, but way more fancy and colorful. It's very light and airy, and it can have many different flavors, from pistachio to chocolate to raspberry and tons of others. It's made of 2 almond-based shells and stuffed with sweet paste. It's often served with tea, but I recommend stuffing them in your mouth one by one until your stomach explodes. Mille Feuilles, meaning 1,000 leaves because it's made with 3 layers of puffy pastry. This 17th century pastry also contains 2 layers of pastry cream. Well, I say 17th century, but some say that it was invented in 1867, and you know what French pastry wars were like. I'm not gonna get involved. I just want to stuff my face with sugar without getting political, but hey, it's French sugar, so somehow it's not as bad, right? Crêpes. Typically something from the region of Brittany, Paris is absolutely full of these things. Just walk around and you'll easily find a crepe kiosk, especially in the Montparnasse neighborhood. Probably the most widely available street food in the French capital, it can be sweet or savory, with stuffings from Nutella to eggs, marmalade, or even ham. If you're not entirely sure what a crepe is, it's basically a very thin pancake, but who doesn't know what a crepe is? Seriously, educate yourself, you peasant. Kebab. If you're surprised, welcome to the 21st century and its incredibly cosmopolitan cities. Thanks to Turkish immigration, much of Europe's cities are loaded with kebab shops, and Parisians consume a lot of it. Probably the most popular food that they eat when they're drunk on the streets, this heavily treasure is usually made of lamb meat contained in a wrap or pita bread, often paired with fries. If you see a big chunk of rotating meat through a window, just run inside. Snails. Snails, also known as escargot in French. To be clear, this isn't like the beaver tail in Canada, which actually isn't a beaver tail. We're actually talking about real snails here. But we do need to include it on this list, even if it's more unacceptable. They're actually quite popular, usually served with a combination of butter, garlic, and herbs. If you don't do it for the cultural experience, just do it for the iron and the magnesium that they contain. The restaurant L'Escargot Montegal has been serving snails for 200 years, although I would assume people have been eating snails since prehistoric times because, well, you just eat whatever you find on the ground. And somehow one day that became a fancy thing. Steak tartare. This is another one of those things that's best to eat when you don't know what it is. It's certainly very good, but it might be less appetizing when you know that it's actually just raw meat, either beef or horse, mixed with raw egg. This bistro classic usually contains onions, capers, and herbs, along with other seasonings, often presented separately to be mixed in according to personal preference. Onion soup. Like many foods, this one originated as a humble peasant dish, usually based on meat stock and onions. It's either served with croutons or, when they go crazy, large pieces of bread covered with cheese floating on top. Who said the French aren't always refined? They know how to have fun, and they actually found a way to turn soup into junk food. It can be served as a first course, as an entire meal, or even as medicine after drinking too much vin rouge. Jambon-Beurre. We've now established that the French are known for their weird and sometimes fancy dishes, just as much as their extremely simple and yet delicious foods. The Jambon-Beurre falls into the latter category. They can brag about their food all they want, but this is pretty basic. I mean, it's literally just ham and butter sandwich. And yet Parisians will pay up to €4 for it. Around 1.2 billion of them are sold yearly in France.